I just want to give my great congratulations to everything that the Malvern Hills Green Party has achieved. It's fantastic to see what you've done in your local councils and to be here actually today with this public meeting, which is absolutely full to overcrowding. And I just want to wish you all the very best for the council elections next year, and to say to people, please do get involved with the Green Party. It's growing hugely. It is the party that has the right answers, I think, to the big questions that we're facing today. So if you want to get involved, just please contact your local representatives, because they'll be delighted to have you, and together we can make a real difference.
This afternoon, Caroline is going to start by giving us a short talk, and that will follow that with a question and answer session, followed by questions from you in the audience. And we will ask you, please, if you can keep your questions short, so that we can pack in as many questions from the audience as possible during the limited time available to us, if that's all right. So followed by the questions from the audience, followed by book signing, Caroline Lucas. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a lovely introduction. Thank you so much for being here. I must admit, in my wildest dreams, I didn't imagine that we would have this many people. So thank you so much, and I can assure you the pressure is on now to make it worth your while for standing or hanging or doing whatever you're doing to try to make space in this room. But I am delighted to be here, and it really does feel like a kind of a coming home, having been born in Malvern and lived here for the first 18 years of my life. It's a town I know very, very well, and my parents are still here, so it's always lovely to come back. But it feels like the Green Party has certainly gone from strength to strength since I was last here, so congratulations for that. I was asked to say a few words. Actually, I got two different messages. One said talk about green leadership, and the other said talk about green visions for the future, so I thought we may as well talk about green leadership for visions of the future. So I shall roll them into one. But to start off a bit on green leadership, I guess the first thing to say about green leadership very practically and specifically right now, of course, is that we've got green co-leadership, because the decision that was made at our last party conference in the autumn was to elect myself and Jonathan Bartley as co-leaders of the Green Party. And that was something that was convenient for us both. He has a disabled son, so he came to me and said it would have been hard for him to do the job full time. So this was a way of making it possible for him. It also makes it more possible for me, because I've got all of my parliamentary commitments as well. But as well as being something that was just simply practical for us both, we also wanted to demonstrate something about what we would say is leadership in politics and is about the new politics in a sense. Because by experimenting and modelling what a co-leadership model might look like in leading a political party, what we want to do as well is start a wider debate about politics in our country and how we make it more possible for more people to get engaged in politics. And if you look at that from the perspective of Westminster, for example, you cast your eye along the green benches, and I don't think anybody could realistically say that the people that you see along those green benches, by and large, truly represent the diversity of modern Britain. And the reason that they don't, or one of the reasons that they don't, is because the number of people who can have the kind of lifestyle required to be an MP in this country, in other words, being on call 24/7, being away from home, for days on end, is by definition relatively small. And so we want to experiment with things like job sharing for MPs as well. And we think it would be a very good way of ensuring that we have more people involved in national politics, because people with caring responsibilities, people with disabilities, people who've just got other things they need to be doing, would be able to have the chance to be able to contribute to the national political debate. But it would also be a way, I think, of ensuring that the politicians we have in Westminster do keep grounded in their constituencies, because I can promise you, again, looking around those green benches, you do find, some slightly strange people. I mean, I'm sure they would say the same about me as well, but Westminster is a bit of a Hogwarts. It is a bit of a bubble. And I think the more we have people who really remember what life is like in the rest of the world, that can only make our politics better. So we're trying to demonstrate a new kind of leadership with our leadership model, and doing that in a very serious way, challenging really how we get more people into politics, more women in particular, more people from black and ethnic and minority backgrounds. Basically, I don't think we can expect our parliament to have credibility and legitimacy in the country as a whole until it looks rather more like Britain as a whole. And there are a whole range of things that need to happen to make that possible. And if we're looking at women in particular, for example, where we've still got less than a third of Parliament being women, then yes, we need to have more more free childcare, more mentoring, all of those kind of support things. Women-only shortlists, I think we should be using too, personally. But I think we also need to change the culture of our politics, because anyone who tunes into the Prime Minister's questions and thinks of that as a sensible way to do anything, frankly, would probably be in a very tiny minority. It's a madness, and it doesn't hold the government to account, and it is just people baying at each other. And it does strike me that we have an opportunity coming up, potentially, because you've probably heard that Westminster is quite literally disintegrating, and I mean the building as well as the institution. And the institution is literally crumbling into the river, and it's full of asbestos, and they are saying that MPs are going to have to leave it for at least 5 or 7 years while they completely overhaul it. And so my suggestion is we leave it completely, we turn it into a very nice museum, and meanwhile we all go up to a lovely new building in the north, a nice glass building, perhaps building on the Bundestag or the Scottish Parliament or the London Assembly, come to that. There are some really nice models of parliamentary buildings which are accessible, which are not designed to make people feel that they don't belong there, that it's about keeping you out. Because that's what Westminster feels like, frankly, as you walk along there. Whereas these other institutions that I'm talking about, by the use of glass, by having a round hemicycle instead of the kind of the antagonistic, competitive way in which we face one another 2 sword lengths apart, and all of that stuff. It makes a lovely story in terms of our history, but it really isn't a very fit-for-purpose way of doing politics in the 21st century. So I think all of that is part of what Greens are bringing to the political debate, to try to bring Parliament, if not into the 21st century, I'd settle for the 20th, but we've still got our work cut out for us on that one. I mean, it's still the case that as you walk into the chamber, you can get offered your snuff if you are minded to take some snuff on your way in. I did try it, actually. It was rather well. You still have the crazy thing that when the bell goes, you've got 8 minutes from wherever you are on the parliamentary estate to get to the chamber in order to vote. And my room is an awfully long way away from the chamber. I'm sure that's entirely coincidental, but when the bell goes, you've got 8 minutes, and you don't hang about, you just go. And one of the shocking things as you go, I'm in this room, a building called Norman Shaw North, which was the old Scotland Yard, if anybody knows that bit of London. So you're running through the other bit of Norman Shaw, then you're going through Portcullis House, the modern bit, then you're going underground and along the terrace, and anyway, 8 minutes is you have to run. But as you run, what you hear is everybody saying, what are we voting on? Does anyone know what we're voting on? I mean, it's funny, but it's shocking too, because honestly, the power of the whips in the other political parties is huge. In other words, everyone else is getting a little message on their BlackBerry telling them which way to vote. And so they don't need to know what they're voting on, they just see a message saying which way they need to vote. Now, I don't have a whip, so we have to work it out ourselves. And we are now known for being often the best people who do know what's going on, because people in my office, bless them, have been going through all of these amendments and counter-amendments, trying to work out what is going on. And you would have thought that, again, in the 21st century, first of all, you might have something that we had in the European Parliament called an explanatory statement, which was when you put down an amendment to a piece of legislation, in the European Parliament, it's actually mandatory to include a 50-word explanation of what you're trying to do. So instead of having an amendment that simply says, in paragraph 2, little b.1, change and to or, which unless you've done quite a bit of background reading means nothing at all, it actually tells you what that is designed to do. Now, this was such a threat to the whips in the other parties that they hugely opposed my innocent amendment suggesting that we might just like to let people know what they're voting on. And there was a huge debate, a very robust debate, which you can read about in Hansard when I made this suggestion that we might like to know what we're voting on. And of course, when it came to the vote, people voted against it, presumably because they didn't know what they were voting on. But it was massively frustrating. When MPs had the chance to change this, they didn't. And it was just interesting to see how the whips have it all kind of stitched up, really. And so I tell that story simply because, we pride ourselves on our mother of all parliaments, but it's got quite a long way to go, really, before it becomes as democratic as it needs to be and as responsive as it needs to be. So that's one bit about Green leadership when it comes to our political institutions. But I guess another way of talking about it would be very much topical right now with the by-election happening in Richmond Park, caused, as you'll remember, by Zach Goldsmith triggering that by-election because he was opposed to the expansion of Heathrow. You'll see that the Conservatives are not standing against him, UKIP are backing him. So the regressive alliance, if you like, have got their act together rather nicely over there. So they're now going to do their very best to get him back into Parliament and to vote against to keep voting for a hard Brexit and so forth. And so the challenge has been whether or not the more progressive parties can get our act together, which has been slightly more complicated. But you might have heard that there was a decision last night that Richmond and Kingston Green parties have decided not to contest this election in order to give the best chance to the Liberals who are in the best position to win the seat. It was a controversial decision, but I think it was the right one because I think that vote will get very squeezed there. And I think we should be demonstrating that when there are key moments, and this one seems a really key moment when it comes to whether or not we can really shave down Theresa May's majority still further, whether we can get more voices in there, crucially, who are advocating electoral reform. If we can get key voices there advocating a closer link to the EU, yes, of course, we have to respect the outcome of the referendum, but that doesn't mean casting ourselves into the wilderness with a completely hard Brexit, but to keep a closer one. I think all of those are real gains to be made, and if in return the Liberals then look at the county elections in 2018 and give us the best undertaking that they can, not a guarantee, but an undertaking that they will discuss with us the targeting strategy for the council elections, which might give us a freer run in some of our target areas. It seems to me that the urgency of our politics is such that we should take those discussions and debates very seriously. It is a controversial proposal around this idea of progressive alliances. Some people agree with it, some don't. But to my mind, it just feels to me that when we have an electoral system that is so stacked against smaller parties, when we've got a government elected with just 24% of the eligible vote, and where, if we're not very careful, because of the disarray that Labour is in, then we are, and indeed because of the constituency boundary changes, which will hand another 25 or 30 Labour seats to the Tories without them needing to do anything. And you look at Scotland as well, where clearly the SNP are now in control. Then the idea that we're going to be able to replace this Tory government, this hugely damaging Tory government, with anything else in any time soon is very remote. And for me, the prize is whether or not we could see if we could use this opportunity to get electoral reform. And I know, certainly those among you who've been following this debate for a long time will probably roll your eyes and think we've been trying to get electoral reform for the last 50 years, why is it going to be any different now? And I have some sympathy with that view, except that I think what could be the game changer is that I think that for the first time, more and more people in Labour are recognising that it's in their interests to adopt electoral reform. If you look at Scotland, they got nearly 25% of the vote in the last general election, but just one seat. So even it's not working for them. And increasingly, you've got people like John McDonnell, who's done a very public U-turn, saying now he's in favour of PR. Jeremy has said that as long as it maintains some kind of constituency link, he's in favour of it. You have Unite the Union, the biggest union, now in favour of it, the TUC saying they're going to reconsider it. There are people like Chuka Ramuna from the centre of the party who's setting up an all-party group in Parliament on electoral reform. I spoke at a fringe meeting at the Labour Party conference on electoral reform that was absolutely packed. It feels to me that this is the thing that will change things. The famous saying is Turkers don't vote for Christmas. They certainly don't. But when they recognise there might be something in it for them too, then they might just change their minds. And I feel that we might be getting to that point now. So that's why it is so important to be talking to Liberal Democrats, to be talking to the Labour Party, to Plaid in Wales and so forth, about whether or not we can be a bit smarter, I think, with this electoral system. Because to get a majority who would be in favour of changing the electoral system at the next election is the game changer for us. We know over 1 million people voted Green at the last general election. 1 million people, that's amazing. To think that many people put that cross in that box, knowing in many, many places, most places, that actually, barring an unheard of revolution, the Green MP isn't going to get in that time because of our electoral system. Nonetheless, there is so much pent-up energy for the kind of political alternative that we're about. To be able to really capitalise on that, and to have an electoral system that would actually, put that into practice, I think it would be, it would be a game changer. If we had 1 million votes under a system of electoral reform, then we would have had 23, 24 MPs. Just imagine how different that could be. So that, to me, is the prize. And the reason that I'm wanting to do everything that I can for it just now is that sense that we're running out of time. In the introduction, you were saying I've been a member of the party for a long time. I have. I joined in 1986, so this is the 30th year of my membership. And I think if someone had said to me, even 20 years ago, do you think that after 30 years that we'd still just have one MP, then I think I would have been disappointed. I would have imagined that we'd have got through this barrier sooner. And when you think about the urgency of our message on climate change, on biodiversity, on what's happening to the welfare system and so forth, it is so vital that we get more green voices heard. And that's what I wanted to just spend the last few moments talking about, I suppose, because for me, it's the climate crisis that really drives me. That's what keeps me awake at night, just thinking about how, in spite of everything that we know, we still don't seem to be making the right decisions. And to the contrary, we are positively making the wrong decisions when it comes to this government. So giving the green light and more subsidy to fracking, promoting nuclear power, which isn't going to be any use to us because it's going to take so long to get it up and running and it's going to cost so much. And that's even before we worry about where we're going to put all of that nuclear waste. You know, the kinds of investments that we need in green technologies and green energy, energy efficiency. What's so frustrating is that we know those policies will be good for the economy as well. This old idea that somehow environmental policy and economic policy are going in different directions is one we absolutely have to challenge. You know, George Osborne gave that ridiculous comment that we're not going to save the world by putting Britain out of business. Well, no, but the last time I looked, actually it's the green parts of the economy that are doing really well. A green economy is far more labour intensive, for example, than the fossil fuel economy that it replaces. And we have to get more action on that fast. We have to get more action on some of the basic issues around our biodiversity. There was the launch of the State of Nature report a few weeks ago. Really shocking. It was a report put together by a number of the environmental NGOs, chief among them WWF. And they were looking at just the fact that the UK is now one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, literally, and that 1 in 10 of our species are under threat. And Trevor Dines, who is from Plant Life, was giving the opening speech, and he said something which really made my spine run slightly cold, which you might have heard elsewhere, but he was talking about the Junior Collins Dictionary, which is basically a dictionary for 7 or 8 year olds. And he was noting that in the most recent version of that dictionary, the words buttercup, bluebell and conker had been taken out, and in their place you had chat room, blog and something else. No, not acorn, but something else. Anyway, the point being that this, you know, we're only going to save what we love, and we'll only love what we know. And if we don't know it, if we can't name it, if we can't feel that we're part of it, then I think we're losing a huge amount of our heritage for ourselves and chiefly for our children as well. So urgent action on that. And it does mean the great heresy of all, which is challenging the idea that we can go on growing our economy indefinitely in a world of finite resources. There's that lovely quote from Kenneth Boulding, who said that anyone who thinks that infinite economic growth on a planet of finite resources is possible is either a madman or an economist. And I think that just about sums up where we're at. And yet, all around us, we are bombarded by messages that we have to keep consuming. And that's the only way to be valuable and worthy and worthful. You know, we know how useless GDP is as a measure of anything. GDP simply measures the amount of money circulating in the economy. It doesn't tell us whether that's for good or ill. So you have a terrible pile-up on the M5, marvellous for the economy because of all that extra cost of replacing the cars and all the rest of it. You know, irrespective of the fact that obviously self-evidently that is not a good thing. And yet we are bombarded by those messages, and it is still only the Green Party who is challenging that idea that more and more growth makes us happier. New Economics Foundation have done some fantastic work showing that after a certain level of need is met, and clearly that has to happen, but after that level, that more and more growth isn't actually making us happier, it's actually adding to more and more stress and anxiety and so forth. And there's another lovely quote from Professor Tim Jackson, who wrote a book called Prosperity Without Growth. Actually, the story is he was in the Government Sustainable Development Commission, which was an advisory body to the last government. And when he wrote this document for them called Prosperity Without Growth, they wouldn't let him publish it unless he put a question mark after it, because it was such a heretical idea that you could have prosperity without growth. But they said, no, you've got to have the question mark. So that when he then got it published by a private publisher later, he very happily took the question mark off it. But he puts it very well when he talks about the advertising industry, you know, in terms of all of the kind of drivers around us that make us think that consumption is more and more important. And he said, you know, why is it that we've got this advertising industry that is persuading us to spend money we don't have, to buy things that we don't need, to make impressions that don't last on people we don't care about? It just really does not make sense. And when he puts it like that, I think, you know, it makes us really think twice. So I think green leadership is about talking about those things that others won't. And I think the Green Party has form in doing that. And in many cases, as the years have gone by, we've been proved to be right in terms of our analysis. I think the second thing is about the way in which environmental justice and social justice are absolutely entwined. You know, the social aspects of the Green Party policy has been there right from the very start, because we recognise that you can't have the one without the other. That if we're not going to get richer through more and more growth, then redistribution is going to be even more important in terms of ensuring that our prosperity is shared. And so we've been one of the strongest voices challenging the benefits cuts, the rolling back of the welfare state, the privatisation of our public services, what's happening to our NHS. And it's right that we are there making that case strongly. And I guess the third thing I would say is around how we do politics, because I still think a lot of people feel that politics is being done to them rather than feeling that they are genuinely involved and are players in the political system themselves. And I think there's a lot we can learn in terms of using more digital democracy, in terms of having not just consultation. The word consultation really has been devalued and undermined, because most people now know if there's a government consultation, it means the government's made up their mind about something and they're just going through the motions. But, you know, real participative budget making, for example, other participatory processes which are starting with a blank sheet of paper rather than starting with a government's idea that's already there. I think we can be in the forefront of demonstrating some of the ways of doing politics differently that way. And certainly something that Jonathan and I are committed to doing within the Green Party is seeing how we can use more digital technologies to really engage more people who might not be able to literally physically come to our party conference, but in other words, in other ways of getting them to be able to feel that they're part of it and feeding in as well. We're mindful, obviously, that not everybody is digitally connected either, and so this isn't instead of other processes, but I think it could actively run alongside it as well. I guess just the last thing I would just say is, by way of introductory comments, it would be a bit strange not to talk about Brexit, given that that is the major issue of the day. And one of the things that is frustrating me just now, and honestly, if you'd seen my Twitter feed yesterday, you would have, you'd have needed to lie down in a dark room afterwards, because I had the temerity to say that actually I was rather pleased that Parliament will get the right to vote on Article 50. And why people can't understand that voting on Article 50 is not simply a way of blocking what the referendum said. This is about how we Brexit, what kind of Brexit. It's not about whether we Brexit. And that has been, to be a bit serious about it, I think it really does show the depths of distrust in the country between what the political elites are doing and how most people feel, because there is a very understandable lack of trust. But I think that shouldn't mean that we therefore give the government carte blanche to proceed with a Brexit that could be so entirely damaging to our economy and to our society and prosperity. And so this isn't about whether we Brexit. I recognise that the Remain side lost, and there was a vote to leave. But having made a decision about leaving, there is still a decision to be made about where we're going. And to me, Article 50 is about where we're going. Is it to a model that is more like Norway, where we are still members of the single market and where we still have greater social and environmental protection? Or is it the kind of hard Brexit, the WTO, the World Trade Organization Brexit, where we don't have those same protections, as I would say, in my view? And so I think it is right that Parliament gets to say, have a say about what kind of Brexit that we have. And I think from an environmental perspective, there are very, very real concerns right now. I'm a member of the Environmental Audit Committee, which is a select committee that's been taking evidence over the past few weeks from a number of environmental experts about what would happen to the environment post-Brexit. And there are real concerns in terms of the Habitats Directive, the Birds Directive, the Bathing Waters Directive, because although the government is saying that this so-called Great Repeal Bill will be a way of bringing all of that EU legislation into UK legislation, what they don't say then is that basically the government then has its finger on the delete key, and trying to keep track of what is being deleted, first of all, is going to be quite hard. Second, it doesn't take into account the fact that European legislation is evolving all the time. And so the REACH legislation, for example, which is legislation about chemicals safety, that legislation in the last 10 or 15 years has gone through 38 different amendments. So if we're not careful, we're up with what people are calling a sort of a set of zombie legislation. In other words, it's kind of pickled in the time when it was moved across, but it's not evolving, it's not keeping up. And then thirdly, there's also no way of actually making it justiciable, if you see what I mean, to really operationalise it, because you need the Commission and you need the European Court of Justice so that when and if a government is contravening, let's say, the laws on air pollution, you actually have some body to take that country to a court to try to get justice. And although the Supreme Court can apparently look at part of that EU legislation, they can't necessarily look at all of it. So there is a big piece of work to be done, I think, about trying to ensure that we have a living body of environmental laws post Brexit, that it doesn't just doesn't basically disappear. So those are some of the challenges going forward, and there are so many things I could have talked about, and hopefully you'll be able to ask me in questions. But I hope that was a helpful start.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.